In this video, we're gonna tell you about the God of Symbiotes himself, the entity known as the King in Black, Knull. The beginning. The earliest records of what we know about Knull's state is that he's been around for eons. He has witnessed the deaths and births of universes time and time again. He's believed to have ruled over a realm simply called the Abyss. The Abyss, as its name suggests, is sort of an existential void that was present between the death of one universe and the birth of another. In this case, Knull is known to have dwelled within the Abyss that forms smack dab in the middle of the death of the Marvel's sixth cosmos, the same old universe where Galactus was born, and the seventh cosmos, the Marvel universe as we know it. Now, Knull purports that he's existed even way before that, even claiming that he's the literal primordial darkness made manifest. But in truth, this is purely just peacocking on his part, because he's a villain who wants to be as intimidating as possible. If we're looking at the actual canon of the Marvel universe, you'll find that Knull was sleeping like a little baby back when he lived inside the Abyss. In fact, he only woke up because the Celestials, Marvel's own godlike cosmic terraformers, started crafting the cosmos. After that, the Celestials drafted Knull and gave him a job for this new universe they were creating. Specifically, he was tasked with becoming its caretaker, bearing the title King in Black. But instead of falling in line and hunkering down, Knull decided to ignore the Celestials' orders and pretty much wage war against them. Knull's primary reason for putting the Celestials on his hit list was because he believed that these cosmic beings are ruining his home. That is to say, Knull didn't want a new universe. All he wanted was a peace and quiet of the Abyss, something that the Celestials were ruining when they created a new universe. So far, Knull's been portrayed as a petty, whiny baby, right? Well, that's about to change a little bit when you find out that he means business. To fight these Celestials, Knull forged his very own Necrosword, a weapon crafted from literal darkness. And in a true boss move, he forged this weapon from his own shadow, which first manifested into the first ever symbiote in the known universe. Knull basically created an entire species out of spite for the Celestials. The Necrosword wasn't just a ceremonial blade either. He used that to lob off the head of one of his celestial enemies. Now, this severed celestial head will float around in space and will eventually be known as Nowhere, and will basically serve as a hotspot for intergalactic scum and villainy. It also sort of became a mining colony over time, with various spacefaring races cultivating the dead Celestials' organic matter for different purposes. But even a dark god will ultimately fall to a gang of gigantic bucket-headed cosmic farmers, and that's exactly what happened. Eventually, Knull lost his crusade against the Celestials and was shunned back into the Abyss. There's no keeping down a bad seed like Knull though. During his so-called exile, our guy got busy. Instead of wallowing in his defeat or going back to a deep slumber, he went to work. That is to say, he slinked back to Nowhere and started perfecting his Necrosword, which would eventually become the powerful god-killing weapon known as All Black. Of course, no war regalia would be complete without a suit of armor, so using the Void itself, Knull crafted a suit of armor to go along with All Black. And from there, Knull's war went from simply targeting Celestials to destroying all life in the Marvel universe as we know it. Billions of years before Steve Rogers got all juiced up, or before Tony Stark built his Mark I armor, Knull went on a universal campaign that saw scores and scores of gods and other cosmic beings snuffed out. Let there be darkness. During his absolute tear throughout the Marvel universe as we know it, Knull even forged a literal planet that would act as his home base during his crusade against life. And he didn't stop there either. Aside from having his own planet-sized throne, Knull went full-on mad scientist and started using the Void to create life. Knull gave birth to the parasitic creatures that would one day be known as the Exilons. He also experimented with early versions of the symbiotes, which in turn became monstrosities like the villain Mr. E. On top of that, Knull even manifested symbiote dragons along the way, which would eventually make up a huge chunk of his ranks in the future. To make sure that his creations were kept in line, Knull also made sure that they formed a hive mind in which he served at its core, its nexus. From there, Knull terrorized the known universe using these creatures from the Abyss. Scores upon scores of planets, star systems, and peoples throughout the cosmos fell to his crusade. In fact, they didn't just get taken out, they were pretty much eaten and assimilated into Knull's own Void. Knull would discover his first honest-to-goodness challenge when he came across Norn Rad, aka the Silver Surfer. During this encounter, the Silver Surfer had just freed one of Knull's colonies. Of course, the King in Black wasn't having any of that, so he he confronted the Silver Surfer, and the two had themselves a fight. Knull would prove to be too much for Silver Surfer, and the ex-Herald of Galactus found himself fused with Knull's living darkness. This turned the superhero into one of the villain's thralls, calling himself the Void Knight. Eventually, Ego, the living planet, helped the Void Knight to turn back into good old Silver Surfer. Not only that, but Ego even helped Norm free himself from Knull's clutches. Of course, losing a cosmically powered underling in your army would prove to be a huge blow if you were Knull, so he chased down the Silver Surfer with the intention of bringing him back to his abyssal fold. However, it all proved fruitless when Chrome Dome managed to dig deep and use the last remnants of the power cosmic inside him to literally create a star in front of Knull and use it to blast the God of Symbiotes to the farthest reaches of the universe. After that, Silver Surfer thought his job was done, universe saved, problem solved, but boy, was he wrong. Knull wasn't so much defeated as he was simply knocked out. After some time, the God of Symbiotes re-emerged and went back to doing what he does best, conquering star systems and feeding them to the living darkness. Time would pass and Knull's war against all of existence would continue. He'd eventually go on a campaign against a race of gods who were powered by the polar opposite, the light. Knull would end up nearly wiping out the entire species, save for one lone warrior who managed to fight Knull to a standstill. The King in Black would manage to take out this warrior of light with all black. In turn, Knull got stabbed through his evil head during the climactic clash. The two ended up crashing on an almost lifeless planet somewhere in the universe, and with Knull taken out of commission, although temporarily, All Black decided to leave its original owner and allow itself to bond and be wielded by one of the planet's natives, a man named Gore, who would wield All Black as the supervillain Gore the God Butcher. Now, Knull didn't chase after All Black when the living Necrosword decided to leave him for another guy, but we can surmise that this is because Knull saw that Gore was using All Black the way it was intended, for taking out gods left and right across the universe. In any case, about 100 years would pass. During this period, Knull would finally reach the peak of his experiments with creating life from the abyss. Ultimately, he would create a race of parasitic creatures known as the symbiotes, which then he used to bond with other creatures in the universe. All gods fall. You can always count on planet Earth to be home to heroes, which means it was bad news for Knull. The God of Symbiotes' downfall all started when he sent a couple of his symbiote dragons to our big blue marble sometime in 500 CE. These symbiote dragons landed somewhere in Europe and became known to its inhabitants as Grendel and Grendel's mother. Yep, they're the same monsters from real-world folklore. Their rampage would only come to a stop when none other than Thor, the God of Thunder, defeated the two symbiote dragons. But here's the thing, not only did Thor absolutely wreck Grendel and Grendel's mom, but his lightning bolts were so powerful that it ended up causing Knull's hive mind to fracture. As a result, Knull lost control of a majority of the symbiotes under his thrall, and to make matters worse for this evil god, the symbiotes started fusing with hosts who were inherently morally good. This ultimately tainted Knull's creations, and the symbiotes started to rebel against their own creator. In the end, the symbiotes' uprising proved to be successful as they managed to and trap him deep within the same planet he once called his throne world. From there, the symbiotes gave the unnamed planet the name Klyntar, which meant cage in the language of the symbiotes. And you might be surprised to find out about this, but the symbiotes themselves actually became a force for good after overthrowing Knull. They formed a council called the Agents of the Cosmos, which served as this sort of peacekeeping force that the symbiotes founded in order to fix all the destruction that Knull caused. At the same time, this parasitic alien race wanted to change everyone's perception about them. The return of the king. We then go to the 70s to witness the next chapter of Knull's life. Now remember those symbiote dragons that Thor defeated in the 6th century? Well, one of them, the symbiote that was known to humans as Grendel, was eventually discovered by Project SHIELD. Project SHIELD was basically the precursor to Marvel's present-day international peacekeeping agency, and during this time, they were hankering for a new Captain America after they lost him in World War II. Now, after this ancient discovery, Project SHIELD decided to go on another initiative to create a new super soldier that would fight on the side of justice, liberty, and freedom. This time, they called it the Sim Soldier Program. The program recruited wounded soldiers fighting in the Vietnam War to fuse with the Grendel symbiote to become agents for the government. What humanity didn't know, however, was that reawakening the Grendel symbiote also reignited its link with Knull. After countless years of imprisonment imprisonment within Klyntar, the god of symbiotes reawakened and started tapping into the hive mind again. Slowly but surely, Knull asserted his will over Grendel and the symbiotes the Sim Soldier program derived from. In turn, the human hosts of these creatures went insane. A few decades would pass and Knull would eventually grab a hold of the same symbiote dragon he once sent to Earth. He'd end up telepathically controlling it, allowing the creature to become whole again by gaining back the offshoots that Project SHIELD took from it. This whole episode culminated with the Knull-controlled Grendel symbiote causing mayhem throughout Manhattan. The havoc only came to a stop when Spider-Man and Venom joined forces to defeat it, but this encounter proved to only be the beginning of Knull's renewed crusade against all life. Although the Wallcrawler and the Lethal Protector managed to defeat the Grendel symbiote, Knull was still able to use his powers to separate Venom from its host, Eddie Brock. To Knull, Venom was an embarrassment to the symbiote race, considering that the Black Goo had become a hero in the Marvel Universe. So the god of symbiotes put it on himself to try to recondition Venom to its original goals. Eventually, Eddie Brock would hunt down Knull and confront the King in Black. During the standoff, Knull gave Eddie the lowdown on his true history of the symbiotes. Heck, he even gave special emphasis to Venom and about how that particular child of his was basically a fool for believing the agents of the cosmos and all that. By the end of this confrontation, Knull was able to use the Grendel symbiote to escape into deep space and make his intentions known, that he's going to completely reform Grendel and use it to free himself from Klyntar. After that, it's back again to war. Not long after that, Spider-Man would help Venom escape Knull's clutches. Instead of going after them, the King in Black decided to stay put and locate the T-Rex symbiote. Now, the T-Rex symbiote is part of Grendel, so Knull needs it to completely reform the symbiote dragon and ultimately free himself from his prison. In the end, Knull was successful in finding this crustaceous-themed symbiote, but he encountered a hitch when it tried to bond with Venom, which then caused them to tap into the symbiote hive mind. Witnessing this, Knull attempted to use Grendel and just straight up eat the Lethal Protector to be rid of him once and for all. A grueling, white-knuckled fight ensued between Venom and Knull right after that. In fact, the god of symbiotes almost won the bout, with Knull almost becoming successful in retaking both the T-Rex symbiote and the Venom symbiote from Eddie. But the King in Black forgot one thing: you only celebrate in a fight once you've won. Instead of focusing on ensuring his victory over Eddie, Knull started showboating. This gave Eddie an opportunity to blow up the entire joint, which caused an explosion so hard that it ended up dealing a blow to Knull's original form deep inside Klyntar. And just to make sure that Knull stays down for the count, the T-Rex symbiote sacrificed itself to defeat this Grendel-powered manifestation of Knull by trapping the both of them inside a furnace. In the aftermath of the battle, Knull's original plan to free himself with the Grendel symbiote was thrown out the window. His real form was still stuck deep within Klyntar. But of course, this wasn't the last time that we're going to see Knull. He got a little help from his friends. Some months after Venom and Spidey's initial tussle with Knull, it's revealed that there was a freaky cult on Earth dedicated to worshipping the god of symbiotes. This group managed to grab a hold of a fragment of the Grendel symbiote along with the lifeless body of Cletus Cassidy, the former host of the Carnage symbiote. Now, the cult's plan was to fuse the Grendel symbiote with Cletus, which in turn would manifest a Knull avatar on Earth. And it worked too, because a Grendel-powered Cletus Cassidy was able to successfully psychically connect to Knull after the cult proceeded with their plan. But Cletus wasn't what you'd call a team player. Instead of going along with the cult's schemes, he resisted Knull's influence. On top of that, the Grendel symbiote also managed to gather traces of the living void, also known as the Codex, which then ended up severing their connection to Knull. Still, Cletus wasn't necessarily exclusively against Knull. In fact, he actually wanted to reconnect with the evil god and even free him from captivity. So to do this, Cletus decided to collect more of the Codexes until he had enough of those abyssal remnants to reconnect to Knull and the symbiote hive mind. Knull was able to regain his power not long after that, thanks to Cletus and Grendel's efforts. In fact, he was able to eventually gather enough strength to assert his dominance over the symbiotes, whether they were on Klyntar or on other planets throughout the universe. Everything came to a head when Venom faced off with Cletus, who by then started calling himself Dark Carnage. The Lethal Protector was able to take out the deranged maniac, and this allowed Venom to even absorb Dark Carnage and all the abyssal remnants stored in him. At this point, Knull had fully reawakened, and the man had no plan of taking back Klyntar. Instead, he straight up destroyed the planet he built all those eons ago and used his abilities to take control of the symbiotes there. Knull then transformed all those controlled symbiotes into his trademark symbiote dragons before summoning his dark ancient armor. Shortly after that, a warrior bonded to an exile named Dell tried to stop Knull, but the God of Symbiotes made short work of him. To add insult to injury, Knull even basically told Dell that he should call him Daddy because he created the Exilons, and from there, Knull pulled the Exilon from Dell and reforged his favorite weapon, All Black. With no one to stop him, Knull restarted his crusade against life and light as he sailed through deep space with the intention of devouring everything in his path. On a brighter note, Knull was so busy going to war that he failed to notice that he too was being hunted by his eternal enemy, the God of Light. Now believe us when we say that Knull pulled out all the stops this time around. With his abyssal powers, the God of the Symbiotes promptly drove scores of planets and star systems to darkness while on his way to Earth. And if that wasn't enough, Knull also started making moves to bring back Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, who happens to be half human, half symbiote, to his side by telepathically communicating with the boy. Knull really had it in for Earth, so much so that he made sure that he had an absolutely devastating army when he arrived on the big blue marble. To do this, he absorbed scores upon scores of Kree and Skrull warriors that got in his way. Knull decided to kill two birds with one stone by infecting his eons-old enemies, the Celestials, with the living darkness and adding them to his ranks to wreak havoc on Earth. Oh, and while he's busy with this, Knull also made sure that other planets across the universe were getting the business too. That is to say, he specifically assigned a number of his symbiote troops to simply wreck whatever planet they came across. Knull's war on Earth. Eventually, Knull's plans of laying waste to Earth were set in motion. The large army he amassed on his way to the planet proved too much for the Earth's defenses. This allowed the God of Symbiotes to easily breach Earth's atmosphere and make landfall shortly after that. Earth's defenders stood their ground, but it didn't do much good. After a bit of fighting, Marvel superheroes were easily overcome by the hordes of symbiote dragons. The God of Symbiotes would reveal himself to the world when he emerged from one of the Celestials he had under his thrall, but he wasn't there to set terms. On the contrary, Knull couldn't help but gloat about how he's going to destroy this planet. Simple as that. But he was willing to make the planet's demise as quick and as painless as possible under one condition: if the people of Earth presented him with Eddie Brock. Say what you will, but Knull really knows how to hold on to a grudge. In a desperate attempt to fend off this symbiote invasion, Earth went so far as to sick the mentally unstable superhero Sentry on Knull. According to his plan, the Sentry was aiming to drag the God of Symbiotes to outer space and take him out there for good. But the tables turned quickly when Knull ends up snuffing out the living daylights out of Sentry. Not only that, but Knull even managed to absorb the so-called dark entity living inside the superhero after he took out Sentry. And well, this just makes the God of Symbiotes even more powerful. After that, Knull started infecting each and every superhero he could find. By the time he was done assimilating Earth's defenders and engulfing Earth in black abyssal matter, only a handful of Marvel's superheroes were left, like Spider-Man, Venom, and Black Panther. Witnessing all of this, Eddie Brock decided to present himself to Knull and even attempted to strike a bargain with the God of Symbiotes, his eternal service in exchange for leaving Earth. But Knull wasn't hearing any of this. Instead, he decided to rip the Venom symbiote away from Eddie before throwing the guy off a building. At that point, the God of Symbiotes truly believed that no one could stand against him anymore. So Knull then proceeded to clean house and, for all intents and purposes, devour Earth, sending fleets of symbiote dragons and symbiote-infused superheroes under his command. The King in Black even tries to take out whatever artifacts of power he could get his hands on, like Ghost Spider's artificial symbiote and the Ebony Blade. Still, Earth's remaining heroes had some fight in them. Knull failed to retrieve these artifacts and found out that he still had enemies on Earth who had the power to defeat his thralls. To get around this setback, Knull used his abilities to affect the time stream. He revived the proto-symbiote Mr. E and tasked him with freeing him in the past to make the process of destroying the universe faster. Like we said, Earth superheroes aren't going down without a fight. Mr. E failed in this mission, and to make matters worse for Knull, the Asgardian hero of Valkyrie managed to cut his connection to Nowhere, which resulted in him losing a chunk of his powers. Eventually, Dylan Brock discovered that he had the ability to sever Knull's connection from the symbiotes. Promptly after that, the boy went into the battlefield and started freeing heroes like Captain America and members of the X-Men from the God of Symbiotes' thrall. Knull tried to take out Dylan when he caught wind of this, but Thor came in clutch and fought the Dark God in order to give Dylan more time to free more heroes from the symbiotes. And man, this is one brutal fight worthy of a heavy metal concept album. In the end, Thor found himself defeated when Knull managed to use the living abyss to stab the god of thunder with all black. Knull then went to try and woo Dylan to bring the boy to his side, but what the god of symbiotes didn't know was that somewhere inside a lab, Eddie Brock had just regained consciousness, and the god of light had chosen the man to be the newest avatar. That's because it turns out that the god of light's power has been around Marvel superheroes all along. It just went by a different name in the past, the Enigma Force, with the powers it bestows more commonly referred to as the Unipower. Eddie turned into a cosmically powered lethal protector when he and his Venom symbiote bonded with the god of light. While all this was happening, Knull would end up fighting with the Silver Surfer while in the middle of this mission to wreck Earth. But before they could finish their epic bout, Cosmic Venom burst onto the scene to deal with the god of symbiotes. And in a crazy turn of events that would make any Marvel fanboy super excited, Cosmic Venom managed to fuse Thor's Mjolnir and the Silver Surfer's trademark board to form a super-powered battle axe, which Eddie then used to lob off the symbiote-infested Celestials' heads. At this point, Knull knew that he was gonna get his butt handed to him, so he tried to go for a tactical retreat while using his symbiotes as a diversion. It didn't work because Eddie ended up catching the god of symbiotes on his way to outer space. With Knull in his clutches, Eddie flew his enemy into the sun's core, which caused both the god of symbiotes and Eddie's new god of light powers to burn away. In a last-ditch effort to save his bacon and hopefully continue his rampage across the cosmos, Knull tried to take control of Dylan's body one last time. However, Eddie used the last remaining spark of his cosmic powers to remove any abyssal remnants within his sun and make sure that the god of symbiotes doesn't return.